Mr. President, I want to speak to the Senate about the Ukraine and also about Syria. These are two parts of the world that are of particular critical importance to the United States foreign policy today because what they portend for the future. The fact that our relationship is so rocky with the president of Russia, President Putin, who just a few days after the Olympics suddenly shows his true colors when he invades Crimea, a part of Ukraine, despite all of the agreements when the Soviet Union broke up in the late 80s, early 90s, the agreements that in exchange for moving all of the nuclear weapons out of Ukraine back into Russia, that Russia would forever recognize and respect the sovereignty of Ukraine. Well, that went out the window right after the Olympics. And Mr. Putin showed his true colors. He could couch it in all kinds of terms, that there's a Russian naval base that was there. But the fact is, the whole world knows what he did. And no one really could do anything about it. But then he started to move on the other parts of the eastern part of the country of Ukraine. And that, of course, is going on as we speak. The so-called rebels, which really aren't rebels, they're a front for the Russian military, propped up with actual troops of Russian military, sometimes disguised as being free and independent players simply because they don't have on their Russian uniforms. But in fact, they've taken them off, put on uniforms that are not the Russian uniforms, and say that they're part of the rebel force. It's a ruse, and everybody knows it's a ruse. I went last August to Ukraine, spoke with almost all of the top level members of the government, and ask what they need. To my surprise, at the time, they did not say they needed lethal equipment. They needed up-to-date, up-to-the-minute intelligence, and they needed training. And I have urged the government of the United States to provide that, and we are providing a number of things. This senator thinks that it is clearly in the interest of the United States that we provide more assistance to the government of Ukraine so that their military can have the equipment, including lethal assistance, to hold off Putin's aggression in eastern Ukraine. Now, this is a particularly critical time. I was there last summer. But what has happened in the meantime is over the course of the past year, oil has gone from $100 a barrel. It is now down to 46. I remember asking someone last summer when I was there and in the Baltic states, what did oil need to get to and below in order for Mr. Putin to start really feeling the pinch? And they said anything under $85 a barrel. It's now around $46 a barrel. Although Russia has significant reserves, as of a few months ago, about $450 billion of cash in reserves, that's lower now. and those reserves will hold them for a while, because the price that they're getting for their oil, of which they don't have high production cost in Russia, because the price is so much lower, half of what they were getting, their revenue is significantly down, and therefore all of the money that was being supplied by the Russian government for so many things, a plethora of different social programs, guess who is feeling the pinch? The people of Russia. And so the aggressiveness of Mr. Putin internationally is an attempt to try to take his people's eye off of their own financial depravity and, in fact, get it on the international scene where the president of Russia is quite adept at pounding his chest and banging his fist. Now, the Ukrainians are once again fighting right now as we speak for their territory. The Ukrainian government took back the Donetsk airport in eastern Ukraine. Then the rebels came back, and I say with a wry smile, rebels. I mean, this is the Russian army. They came back and they took it again. And last week, those Russian-backed rebels broke a shaky ceasefire agreement, and they renewed the fighting with the Ukrainian government military. And this senator feels we've got to do more to try to help these people that are trying to protect their independence. If you'll recall, last year we passed the Ukraine Freedom Support Act, which provides further sanctions and lethal aid like anti-tank and anti-armor weapons, counter-artillery radars, secure communications equipment, and tactical surveillance drones. All of that was needed. But the fighting that is following appears to be a steady buildup of Russian support for the rebels. General Hodges, the U.S. Army commander in Europe, said last week that since December, Russia had doubled its support for the rebels. And General Breedlove, our supreme allied commander in Europe, NATO's supreme commander, said that Russian electronic warfare and defense systems have been detected in the conflict areas. And so let's don't fool ourselves. The Russian army is in there, and we have to do more to help them. Now, Syria. This senator feels like that where we are having success right now in Iraq against ISIS, with the multiple strikes from the air, with training up the Iraqi army as the boots on the ground, including some American boots on the ground that are advisors and trainers. At the end of the day, we're going to have to do this in Syria if we're going to be successful. It's a lot more complicated in Syria because of the Assad government, the poor Free Syrian Army that we are now starting to train. It's almost an impossible task. We train them, they go in, they try to attack ISIS, ISIS attacks them, but so does the Assad regime. That's not a recipe for success. We're working with the vetted opposition fighters to go after ISIS in Syria. We have to supply support. We have to supply lethal support in addition to the training and equipment in order for them to be successful. And for them to be successful, It's absolutely in the interest of the United States. Congress has approved the training and equipping of vetted elements of the Syrian opposition, and the Department of Defense recently announced that it will deploy 400 personnel in that effort. We're going to have to do a lot more. The American people are tired of war, and yet we have a new kind of enemy, and we're going to have to take it right to them where they are. Mr. President, I yield the floor.